this is a way I think to conceptualize kind of being and existing both within as like the entity that is existing in this location in the center of your body, as in your source, as well as this entity, which is like the physical representation of your energy, which I think is even beyond where it stops here at the edge of our skin, so to speak. I think our energy is like an aura. It's a field that is perhaps even spherical in some way beyond this body. So I'm going to talk kind of about that relationship and dynamic, because it was hitting me today that one way to conceptualize it is like being a librarian or an archivist, but I like the librarian. And so you're a librarian kind of sitting in this seat, which is in the center. And what you have around you, if you picture like these are the resources at the library, so you could call them books, but I'm going to refer to them as resources. And they are wherever you may arrange them in this space that is proximal to you in your, let's say, auric field, which could be like that around your body. And again, you could fractal that down and look at it just as this body, and you can fractal that down and you could look at it as though like what I'm talking about here is representing what's the action of, I think, your consciousness, like whatever is thinking and speaking and is the collaborative result of your circuiting senses, like is like a granule, I think, in the center of the body, in the direct center. And so I think it's interesting to think of like, here I am as the librarian, and I'm here in the middle of my resources, of how I arrange them. And so I have them, I can have some here, I have some here, I have some here, here, behind me as well. And so like what I'm actively doing in the course of existing throughout the day and throughout my life is a process of, I think, like rearranging these resources, as in some of the similar resources, like putting them in different locations relative to perhaps ease of my ability to kind of withdraw them and or grab them and put them back. And in addition to that, like intentional rearrangement, you know, there can also be, relative to ease, there can also be some resources that we're kind of born into where it's like, oh, it seems like this stuff is here and that's how I access it, as in the attaching and detaching and or like the checking out and the checking back in, the putting back in. Those things can kind of seemingly be like naturally and or we're born into a way where it's like, oh, those resources are located here. And then perhaps throughout one's life, either naturally, organically, as well as intentionally relative to change, which isn't to say that's not organic, but I'm talking about more things that kind of just happen and things that are more intentional relative to practice. We can perhaps rearrange the location of these resources and also cycle the resources in and out. So it's like cycling that which is presently arranged here, perhaps I cycle that out. So those things go into the universe relative to me. They go kind of beyond, away from me, and then different things are cycling in. This is also relating to energetic exchange and how I think it happens. Because I think we're basically, you know, you could see it on this level as a sphere, you could see it on this level as a sphere, you could see it on this level as a sphere, you could see the universe as a sphere, like, so those are almost like the layers of of shell, of onion, of, there's a lot of different ways to conceptualize it. The layers, then you can peel those layers, you know, from the center out. You could reseal them, reheal them, reform them. Like these are the liminal layers, so to speak. This is the porous membrane, just like our skin, but these are the layers of being. This is, so relative to the resources cycling in and out, I think, again, that could be also something that's more intentional in an exchange and, you know, within the day, within moment, as well as the moment that carries like beyond day, as in consistently throughout one's life. So it's interesting, I think I was thinking about this today, like this is a useful way to conceptualize it. So here I am as the entity that is in the center of these resources. And I am the accessor, basically, again, like the librarian, but imagine a librarian that's perhaps like in this place, in the seat, and this is where the librarian operates from, almost like a spider at the center of a web. And so what the librarian is doing is checking in and out, checking out. I mean, you can call it both ways. This could be checking out. This could also be checking in. This could be checking out. That could be checking in. I'm going to call this checking out, like I'm pulling the book. Now I'm accessing and utilizing the resource. And these books can also be like elements. So you could also consider this in addition to a library, and you can consider it the Alchemist. But it's ultimately like, what elements do I have present? Where are they? How does that relate to my ability to access them? Like, you could picture if I had elements that I was storing way up there, way over there, you know, depending on how long my connective arm is, like Stretch Armstrong, or, you know, how short my arm is, or how I may be interconnected with tissue that is beyond my arm, it may be easier and or more difficult for me to access resources that are super far away. And that could also relate to the timing of the signals and the timing of the belt, of like how instantaneous and immediate I can access that resource versus that which is super proximal. But again, it can relate to distance, but it only relates to distance so much as that relates to capacity. So you could have something that's super far away, but like if you have the long arm, or if you have, you know, interconnective tissue that can access it instantaneously, like you could potentially reach that just as easily as you could reach this. But for other people and or instances, again, depending on capacity and consent, something that's super distant could take someone a long time to get to, or they could even be like, I can't get to that, like I don't even consider it, now I just move on, whether they're carrying that way back there or not. This can relate to basically like what we're aware of and what we carry energetically, I think ancestrally, celestially, intergenerationally, also in the archive of our memory and our mind, like things that I know and think of versus like what's at the front of me right now that I'm aware of in the now. And so ultimately it's interesting to me that, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to interpret into this, but I appreciate considering oneself, and especially like one's awareness in the now, as like the librarian or the alchemist. If the librarian, if you want to consider these resources like books, you know, like a library, like an archive. The alchemist, if you want to consider these like elements, you know, like metals, like, or elements of like the periodic table or of the universe, of like things that one can work with. This is material. And I mean, these materials, you can also, this is your energy, this is your, essentially your energetic tissue. So like trauma, healing, patterns associated with that stuff, patterns of behavior, patterns of choice, patterns of awareness, patterns of unconscious bias, like beyond awareness, the unknown, which one is, we are even if we don't know things, we are still carrying our unknown. So it's interesting to, I think, conceptualize like what, I mean, a lot of questions to consider. One could be like, where are my resources? What are these resources? Am I intentional about where they are located and how I use them and how I access them, and, you know, taking them out and putting them back? You can think of it as also like at the grocery store, those things that are stored way up on the shelf or way down low, and those things that are right here, you know, easy to get. But again, I think let's not just call only that which is here in the strike zone easy to get, because it could be just as easy to grab something up here if one has the capacity as it could be to grab here. Like, and I think that's an important thing to point out, because otherwise people can get into normalizing, saying this is just the easy zone and all this is going to be hard. So then people make it hard. Like, perception is an active element. The way that you perceive something will relate to how it results. So ultimately, I think this is an interesting thing to think of, like, okay, what resources do I have here? How am I accessing them? And think about this through the day as you go through days and exchanges, and like notice what shows up. Sometimes you might not even be as intentional. It could just be like, damn, all of a sudden I had this feeling. So it's like, I accessed this resource, but I didn't even feel like I reached and grabbed it. It was like it just showed up inside of me. So considering into and feeling into that which people are, or myself, one is intentionally accessing and resourcing, and that which is kind of just showing up. And then the things that just show up, one can be aware of, and then put that into more of an intentional resource place. Like, imagine if this was like a spherical bookcase, basically all around you is books, and like, where do you want to put these things relative to your needs and or desire to access them, and how does that relate to you then exchanging within yourself as a program, a circuit, like a gyroscope, as well as exchanging with the world and other people. And like, you could think of these like tools that you have, you know, like arrows from a quiver, but you got them all over. So I think this is a shape that can be interesting to consider. Peace.